Hey gang, Alan Combies here. Welcome to another video in a series that I call Morning Coffee with Alan. And I'm just taking a break right now from practicing. This is actually my electronic kit that I practice on and actually gig on. I actually have a gig that I play once a week um, where I actually play on these drums and play out of a speaker. But they're not plugged into a speaker right now, so they just sound like this. But I plugged some headphones in the headphones, in the cans, I've got a full drum sound. So they're pretty handy to have around. I appreciate them. But I was just taking a break, and I thought I was just sort of reflecting on what I could share with you that might help. And as I was getting ready to sit down and play my drums, I started to reflect on, well, you may notice this, like, let me start with my example. So when I sit down behind the drums, and I remember doing this many years ago, I knew that I would go into a different state. Whenever I would have a good gig or I'd play really well on the drums, there was a sort of letting go and a sort of, I don't know, just, sort of getting out of my head, right? Because if you think about anything that you do well, if you're thinking a lot about it, well, that thinking can often get in the way of actually doing the thing, whether it's a conversation with somebody, or taking an exam in school, or a project at work, or sitting down and playing a musical instrument. And so one of the things I remember doing early on, many years ago, playing out in local clubs and bars and stuff, is I would just sit down and I would put my hands on my snare drum, which this isn't really a snare drum, it's a drum pad, but this would be where the snare drum would be. It's the backbeat of most modern music. It's the 2 and the 4, the boom, crack. That crack is the snare. So anyway, it's kind of central to the drum kit. So I would put my hands down on the snare, and I would just get quiet, and I would feel my drum, and I would get very present with my instrument. Now, what I was doing, without really realizing it at the time, was I was anchoring in a certain state, a certain certain mindset, and I was anchoring it in to the point where now, where I sit behind the drums, I slip into that automatically because I just did it so many times. So it's become a habit. Now, I did that consciously, but how many places do you walk into or step into or visit where you subconsciously have those states sort of anchored into them, right? For instance, you might have a cubicle at work, right? So you go into work and you sit down in your cubicle and you go into a certain pattern of thinking. Well, in neurolinguistic programming, we call these anchors. You could also call them triggers. If someone looks at you a certain way, and in the back of your mind, that look reminds you of, Dad pulling out the belt, getting ready to give you a whooping, then you've got an anchor to that look, right? To that facial expression, whether it's on Dad's face or anybody else's. And so it can be useful, and I think that it can be useful to recognize that and to be aware of that. Number one, so that you can consciously use that, right? Just like I did on the drums. If you have a situation where maybe it makes you feel uncomfortable, like let's say, well, here's another example. I used to get nervous before going into a session with clients. And one of the things I began doing was every time, just before going into a session, I would just imagine myself and the client smiling at each other and being very grateful and having a overall pleasant experience. Now, you could say I was future pacing that, but I was also anchoring in those pleasant feelings with that sort of place in time and space, if you will. So, like just before going into a session, I would do this thing, and I've done it enough times now where I don't have to repeat that. It just sort of happens automatically, and I kind of go into a nice relaxed state, and I'm more open and ready to connect with my clients. Because obviously, for the same reason, you can imagine if I have a lot of thinking on my mind, whether it's insecurities or, you know, or am I going to be able to fit in lunch today, or there could be all kinds of thinking. Whatever that thinking is, it has the potential to get in the way of me actually serving my client, right? So spatial anchors, recognizing how your environment and how life can trigger certain thought patterns. Recognizing that is key, because once you begin to recognize and understand how that works, you can be more consciously aware of it. And that's really one of the keys to having a better, more pleasant experience of life, is to understand how our experience is being created from moment to moment, and how different things in life can trigger thinking, habitual thinking, that conditioned thinking that's been going on for a long time. And so I hope that helps. One of the things that I really want to help people do is to have a more overall pleasant experience of life. And that doesn't mean you're never going to be triggered, or you're never going to feel bad, or you're always going to recognize when you're in a trance. But it does mean being able to wake up to it more and more. And as we become more conscious, as we become more mindful, as we become more aware of how we create our experience and who we really are, the natural side effects, I believe, is to have a more pleasant experience of life. So anyway, I hope that helps. I got to get back to practicing. I have a lot of tunes to learn for a cover band that I'm going to be playing in. So this is Alan Combies, Transformational Coach, FasterEFT practitioner, wishing you peace, love, compassion, and a better experience of life. We'll see you in the next one. Take care.